Welcome to the Lair, a place where interesting people you may know tell you things you didn't. So grab a chair and your favorite vice and get comfortable. There are no rules in the Lair, but there is Laura Babcock. You know her from TV, and she is not into media monogamy. Let's find out who else is in the Lair.
Welcome to the Lair.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here, Laura.
Now, this is an unknown format for you. You've never done a podcast before?
Never.
But
never.
you've done a lot of things, Boris. And
I've done a lot of things, but this is a first.
This is a first. Well, having looked at your biography, we're here in the Lair, if you hadn't noticed the voice by now, with Boris Brott, the maestro. And I've looked at everything that you've done in your life, Boris, and so for this to be a first, I'm honored.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here.
You know,
I'm honored to do it with you.
Thank you. I moved to Hamilton about 20 years ago, and of course, when you come to Hamilton, you learn a little bit about its history, and you're one of the people that I had heard about. But it wasn't until I took a little bit more of a look at your biography after we met that day at the Hamilton Club a few weeks ago. At 5 years old, you were performing with the Montreal Symphony?
Well, I kind of, was into it because of my family background.
Right, your father
my father and mother, both musicians. We grew up in really quite humble circumstances. We were living in one room in my grandparents' flat in Montreal,
really?
and my parents, both musicians, and they played and rehearsed, and my father composed all in that one room where we all lived. And so it was kind of preconditioning. And I guess that my parents really, the desire was that I follow in their footsteps. Something I haven't continued with our children. And I'm not sure that was a good or a bad thing.
Because your brother also was in
Dennis
music as well.
is in music. He is a cellist and runs a chamber music festival in Montreal and is the head of chamber music and cello instruction at the Conservatoire in Montreal.
So by 5 years old, you were playing for a youth matinee
That's
with
right.
the Montreal Orchestra.
That's right. Dr. Wilfrid Peltier conducted, and my father wrote a violin concerto especially for me. And well, there were several amusing parts of this. My parents had explained to me that when you get onto on the stage, when you go on the stage, the audience will applaud, and you have to bow, but they didn't tell me when. So I got out from the wings and I bowed myself all the way to the middle of the stage. And then Uncle Pelly, what I used to call Peltier,
and you looked a little bit like Shirley Temple. We have a photo we're gonna put up.
This is my grandmother's
Didn't
influence.
he look like Shirley Temple? Yeah, he did, for sure.
This is my grandmother's influence. My grandmother really had a lot to do with bringing me up because my parents were busy, performing and earning a living as musicians. And she had this idea of me, with lots of curly locks.
Well, it was 1949.
Well, yes.
So
it's true.
It was the style of the day, the fashion.
Well, I don't know whether the lace and the short velour panties all pants went with it, but nonetheless, every time I look at that picture, I'm just a little bit embarrassed.
Well, you weren't aware that you had a page on Wikipedia.
No, I wasn't
at all. That's the featured photos.
I wasn't at all.
So you bowed your way all the way to the center
my
of
way,
the stage.
and then Pelly said, "What was this like playing a violin concerto of your dad's?" And I was very open and honest about these things. I said, well, to be honest with you, it was kind of weird because every time I'd learned a passage, he changed the notes.
Oh, no.
Because, of course, he was composing it at the same time as I was learning to play it. But it was a lot of fun. I must say I had a wonderful childhood. Despite the crazy circumstances of it, I have only the fondest recollections of it. My parents really were wonderful people, and they gave me really a fabulous upbringing. And they weren't insistent that I become a musician. They said that was what they could help me with.
Sure.
But at the age of 12, I had a very not a particularly good childhood in terms of my friends at school who didn't understand what I did and played the violin, and I guess I was a bit of a nerd with three-piece suits even then.
Were you bullied? The lace and the velvet?
Well, no, there wasn't the lace and the velvet, but I kind of, I don't know, I didn't get along very well with my contemporaries. Pardon?
Did you get bullied at school?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, quite severely. I'm not exactly sure why I told you this, but in any case, at one point when I was about 11, 12, I really decided that I wanted to do sports. I wanted to do all those things that everybody else was doing, and I couldn't do because my parents were worried that I'd hurt my hands.
Right.
So I quit playing the violin for a year, and they said, fine, go ahead, do that, do all the things that you really want to do, and see whether you like it. So I, tried to learn how to skate and play hockey, and I was really terrible at that. And then I tried to learn how to play baseball. I wasn't very good at that either. Anyway, after this year was over, I realized I really was a nerd, so I went back to the violin.
And you had a gift, right? Not just a
Well,
nerd, a gifted. Right?
Yeah, I
thank
mean,
God.
and
But by 15, you started your own Philharmonic.
yes, because I needed an orchestra to practice on. I mean, you know, this business of conducting, you can't just stand and wave your arms in front of a mirror. You have to have people to relate to. And, you know, you can't buy an orchestra very easily or get opportunities.
Right. So you just
So I
start,
was
what,
very
at 15?
entrepreneurial, even in those days. And so I got together some of my chums from high school. I was in the band at school. And I said, let's found an orchestra. And so we did. We founded the Philharmonic Youth Orchestra of Greater Montreal. And then we needed some subsidy. We couldn't figure out, you know, how we were going to pay for the cost of rehearsals and instruments and programs and put on a concert and advertising.
All the things that a normal 15-year-old worries about.
Of course. Anyway, I decided I'd go up and see my minister in Ottawa and my MP. And on the trip, on the way up there, I was at the airport, and I ran into Jeff Sterling, who was the president of CKGM in Montreal.
I grew up in Montreal. That's a huge station.
And so, you know, I was this little boy
Yeah.
sitting in the lounge, and he said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to Ottawa to see my MP about this youth orchestra. And he said, well, I'm interested. Tell me about it. Anyway, they became our major sponsor.
Wow.
And I got to know a lot about pop music at that point because I got involved in the station and the programming of the station.
So just
it
before
was
we
fun.
leave your childhood, Boris, because it reminds me a little bit of the apprenticeship of Dudley Kravitz, right? I'm just thinking of
goodness.
Montreal at the time.
Yes.
I'm thinking about the one-room apartment.
Well, it was kind of that,
yeah, it
but
was
no
a
little
kind-
horse delivering
right,
the milk.
Right. But what was Montreal like back in the day? I mean, we'll get to Hamilton, but I grew up in the
was a
70s.
wonderful
So
city. Montreal still is a wonderful
Yeah.
city, despite everything that you read in the newspapers with the riots and all that stuff. Montreal is an incredible city. It was more a center of Canada in those days, a financial center for Canada.
yes, absolutely.
It was only when the separatist government became
The exodus in the 80s of all the English-speaking-
and so that changed in a way the city culturally, but it was a great city. I had no fear of driving my bicycle literally everywhere, or riding on the buses, and you know, I went everywhere in the streetcars, and my mother was kind of a rebel too. She ran around Montreal she's a cellist in the orchestra, and she ran around Montreal on a bicycle with a cello strapped to her back.
What a great image.
And she also took me to school, you know, perched on the handlebars of that bicycle.
which might not have helped with the whole, acceptance thing.
No,
right?
not really, not really.
Yeah, the visual,
Yeah,
It's not the best way to roll up.
it was a childhood I had to live down later on in life, but it was a wonderful childhood.
Well, and after you said you were 11 and you took a year off to see if
Yeah.
being like everybody else was the route to take, and then you realized that no, you were great at what you did, and you started this Philharmonic. Once you found that groove for yourself, did it make it easier for you at school? Did you sort of create your
No,
own
it never-
world?
Well, high school was much easier.
Yeah.
We just had our 50th anniversary anniversary of graduation from high school, and I met a lot of the kids who I knew at the time, who were
Right.
now, of course, adults and grown up in my age, and
Are any of them
they had all
maestros,
kinds
or-
of. Sorry.
Are any of them maestros?
No, none of them are musicians.
So, but did you enjoy?
But we enjoyed our time
Yeah.
together with a wonderful music program at West Hill High School. We had 4 bands, and we had 2 choirs, glee clubs, and
Wow.
it was really a very enriched program for, it wasn't a private school or anything, it was a public high school. And so I got a lot of encouragement. I was in the band, and when Mr. Etienne, who was our teacher, discovered I had an interest in conducting, he gave me one of the bands to act as music director for, and so I really got a chance to practice a great deal.
And you were in your early 20s, I guess, won some conducting competitions internationally.
Well, I started professionally even younger than that. I went to study in the United States with Pierre Monteux, who was occasionally came to conduct the Montreal Symphony during the summers. I took a year off and went to Mexico when I was 14, and studied at Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes.
So your
in
parents were
Mexico.
very relaxed.
My parents were amazingly relaxed. They
Yeah.
let me live there.
Because what parent would let their child go to Mexico for a
Well,
year
my
at 14?
mom insisted that she went down, first of all, and kind of sort of sussed the joint out. And they had arranged for me to stay with a family. And it was a lovely family. And the father was a violinist and also a developer. Talking about developing.
Yeah, we've got some in the audience.
He was the developer for Acapulco. built the Princess Hotel,
Wow.
put the airport into Acapulco.
Because usually you hear a developer of a certain building, not of an entire city. So
He was very, very advanced and made quite a
Yeah.
lot of money, lost quite a lot of money. We retained a friendship and still do.
and it's a beautiful place. I'm sure you've been to Acapulco
Oh,
since,
yes.
have you? I mean,
But getting there in those days was not exactly fun because you had to go over Tasco, which is this silver mining town, in these little winding roads. It took forever to get there.
It's breathtaking,
There was no,
though,
there was
when
no
you-
airport.
it's
He
breathtaking
built the
now,
airport
though, when
there.
you see it.
Oh, it's
I mean, I
incredible.
was there before they had, I guess, was it the mudslides or it was they had a natural disaster, but it's an incredible place. So you spent a year in Mexico when you were
Spent a year
14.
in Mexico studying. I took a year off high school, off school generally, and then got permission from high school to attend half days, and went to McGill at the same time. So it was
So you're going
quite
to McGill
challenged.
while you were in high school.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
it was
he's
a
done
kind
a
of
few
crazy.
things.
It was
We're not
that
at 20 yet,
crazy
folks. Are you
way.
following this?
It was a crazy, crazy youth. And I also,
dirt roads listening to Supertramp.
you were better off.
Deirdre, you need the mic, all right? you gotta get close. No, I'm being serious. If you're gonna talk
There's
about,
a microphone
if
right
you're
over
gonna
there
talk
at that
about smoking
table,
weed
Deirdre,
to
if you wanna use
Supertramp
it.
or whatever, you gotta get on the microphone. Yeah, so what time was it that you started to travel internationally and do the conducting competitions?
I was supposed to go to the Vienna Hochschule and got a place there, which was very great honor to be accepted.
Yeah.
And but I had finished my conservatory in Montreal and had graduated from the program that I was in at McGill. And I was very enthusiastic, telling Monteur during the summer programs that this is what had happened, what I was going to do. And he was less enthusiastic and said, well, why don't you come and be my assistant in London? I've just taken over the London Symphony Orchestra. He was 85 at the time, and he'd signed a 25-year contract. He was also very optimistic as a music director with the orchestra. But anyway, they trotted me out as an 18-year-old. And sort of from that, I guess that was my first professional opportunity. And then when I was 19, I was engaged as assistant conductor of the Toronto Symphony.
And so what year would this be that we're at
Oh,
now,
God, I don't
Boris?
know. I'm not very
'Cause
good
I
at
remember
addition.
when-
1944
Hello,
plus
how are you doing?
19.
Make yourself
63.
comfortable. Help yourself.
63.
63. Because I was going to say Graham, do you mind grabbing Ardith a drink? Would you like a glass of wine or anything? Because I was going to say, in 1969, the Summer of Love, when, I don't know about you, Deirdre, you already said you were hanging out, smoking whatever. 1969, Summer of Love, I think of teenagers at the time trying to get to San Francisco if they can, otherwise just sitting around. You were named one of the, what was it, most upstanding young men in Canada or something?
Something like that.
What's that?
I think it was something run by the JCs, was it not?
Yeah, but it was like a Canadian. You were one of the fine. You were the fine young man of Canada or something in 1969.
Something like
Chamber
that.
of Commerce, the Junior Chamber.
Was it
Junior Chamber of Commerce,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, my dad was the president of that.
Your dad was the
Really?
president of the
Yeah,
Junior
and he was
Chamber of
vice president of the Canadian Junior Chamber of Commerce at one point. Yeah.
Commerce. Well, clearly, I need to get you on the microphone in a little while, Deirdre.
Got one right here.
Yeah,
Ta-da!
yeah, you're on a mic now. But I just find that interesting that your dad was involved with
And
that.
city councilor in Stratford, but the JCs, that's what you
That
got
was what it
there.
was.
That's what you got.
Deirdre's never seen a microphone she didn't like. How proud was your father and mother by this
I
point?
think they were very, very pleased that I'd gone into something that they were wanted me to be in.
Yeah.
They were very encouraging. They were also very, very balanced in terms of being critical. I think my sternest critics were really my parents. They were very, and they stayed involved throughout my life in terms of sort of being a true reflection of critical reflection of what I was doing. I think, we have children now who are in their 30s and they're telling us what we did wrong in terms of bringing them up.
Of course.
Of course. This generally happens, I think, to parents. But I can't say that I have any criticisms of my parents
Now,
particularly.
you were saying that you guys, all four of you, lived in this one-room place in Montreal.
The three of us, my mother, dad, and I lived in the one
Right.
room until I was about 7. When Dennis came along, my younger brother, I was just 8 years old, and there was no room really. And by that time, my parents were doing a little bit better, so we rented a duplex.
Oh, okay. Which is a really popular thing in Montreal. You don't
Very.
see so many anywhere here.
And we were in the upstairs flat. Elmer Locke, who was a very famous Canadian hockey player, and it was of course the days before all these wonderful protective garments they wore, no headgear, nothing.
Right,
And
of course.
every two weeks or so, he would come in with another set of of railroad tracks across his
Oh,
face
my
or his
gosh.
forehead. It was
So
it
at
was
that
quite
point, were you
something.
happy that the hockey thing didn't work out for you when you saw him coming and going?
Well, yes, but I've always loved hockey. I liked attending hockey live. I think it's such an exciting game. I think television doesn't do it justice, but attending live is
What do you think about the
is
fights
phenomenal.
in hockey? Do you think they
I
add to it?
I
or-
don't like that aspect of it,
Yeah.
and it didn't exist to that extent in those days. No, it was not as violent a game in those days. It was a more of a skilled game, and there weren't the fights. At least I don't remember there being the fights that there are
Were you
now.
aware as a child that you didn't have as much as maybe some other kids did? Was that ever a part
Not
of the
at all.
family dynamic?
Not at all. I was not aware of that. I don't recall that. I was very happy in my circumstances and really didn't feel, that we were lacking in anything. We were given everything that we needed really to live. My grandmother was a wonderful cook and really looked after me very well. Having two women in a kitchen was a bit of a challenge, but
So we're in your 20s now.
Yes.
You're traveling around the world conducting.
that's right.
Having success on that front. Did you work with Leonard Bernstein, did I read?
Yes, I won the Metropolis competition when I was 24 and became his assistant. Part of the prize of winning was gold medal, some money, and the job of his assistant, which really turned out to be something quite special because he was quite a genius. Every time I say the word was, it feels strange somehow because he's so much a part of my life. In October, I'm going to be doing the Italian premiere of the film version of West Side Story. They've remastered the film West Side Story with Natalie Wood, and they've wiped off the soundtrack, the orchestral part of the soundtrack, not the vocal part of the soundtrack. And it's going to be done with a live orchestra in various theaters all over the world. It's been done recently at the Hollywood Bowl and New York Philharmonic and Chicago Symphony, but I'm going to be taking it to Italy in October.
How
So it's very
is that?
exciting.
You got to play in front of the Pope, speaking of Italy.
Yes, indeed. In the year 2000, again, Leonard Bernstein, because in '71, when I was with him as his assistant, he wrote Mass. It's a theater piece for singers, dancers, and orchestra, and rock and blues band, and everything you can imagine you can throw into a piece of music. Was written for the opening of the Kennedy Center in Washington. And he worked with a Jesuit priest because the framework was the Latin Mass,
Right.
but then there were these tropes, these interpretations of the Mass that took place between, and that was really the kind of operatic aspect of it, commentaries on the Mass. And there are 25 soloists in this and a celebrant, and the 25 soloists are called the street people, and they comment on what has gone before. It's really kind of the story of a celebrant who realizes that his congregants are losing faith. And every time he turns his back, they are living lives that have absolutely nothing to do with what he preaches. And he eventually has a mad fit and rends his robes and throws the chalice and the monstrance to the ground, spilling the blood of Christ, the
Wow.
wine.
How did the Pope take that?
Well, interesting. That was why I'm saying
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of this, is that I found it really very interesting that Pope John Paul II would agree to have it performed, because during the time it was written, it was outlawed for Catholics. The cardinals of Boston and Philadelphia and Washington and Los Angeles sent out an edict to all of their parishioners saying, you may not go and may not attend this.
Wow.
So I was very surprised to be asked to do it. And when we met the Pope, my entire family, wife and so on, my father, who was 85, 86 at the time, came also to the performance. And I asked him why he had agreed to this. And he said, well, you remember St. Augustine. Well, when a Pope asks you, do you remember something? Even if you don't remember, you can't say no. You can't say no. So I don't know. I sort of smiled sheepishly and nodded my head because I didn't want to
So you
lie
li- you
in front of the
lined up.
Pope either. And he said, well, you remember he had grave doubts about his faith. And when I think of this piece, it is the fact that it celebrates at the end. The boy soprano takes the celebrant and brings him over to the choir, and the entire audience holds hands and sings Loud, Loud, Loud Day at the end.
Wow.
So for me, the work celebrates coming back to faith, and that you always have the potential to come back to the faith, and that the faith is always there to welcome you. And so in that Jubilee year, he felt it was an important message to give. And with the Mass we did, the performance was done during the day of celebration for migrants and itinerants. And so it was, he felt again that was an important
it's really
message to
powerful.
give. Very powerful message.
Go ahead.
The thing about St. Augustine, and long have I loved you, but so long has it taken me to find you. Like, it is all about search and journey, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
One of the reasons I wanted to ask you the question was that Rob, our producer, my husband, we went to Rome. He's a Catholic. We went to Rome during that millennium year as well, and a lot of things about your bio he thought was impressive, but when I said, Rob, he played in front of your favorite pope, right? He's got a soft spot for John
Well,
II.
I must say he's our favorite pope.
Yeah, yeah. And what makes him your favorite
We
pope?
had something to do with Ratzinger, actually, at the time, because he was the secretary to the Pope. And he must also have had a soft spot for this idea, because the cardinals did write a letter to the Pope warning him of this and saying this really should not be performed in the Vatican. And it apparently was hidden by him, this correspondence was sort of lost in a drawer.
Ratzinger hid it from Jean Paul.
And but he got it to him on the day of the performance. He got it to him the day of the performance.
Wow.
And so it was lost for a while.
Right.
That's all I remember. And I heard.
My application for the convent.
Did you apply the Are you serious?
I did.
Really?
I was looking at that for sure.
Ardith, did you want to comment at all on meeting the Pope? Any thoughts? There's a mic right there if you have anything you want to add.
He was extraordinary.
Yeah.
We all had different memories of him.
And what was yours?
A great sense of peace and a great sense of gentleness.
Yeah.
And we were all completely overwhelmed. We walked away and we were speechless. We walked for quite a long time before the five of us and anyone said anything.
Really?
It was so overwhelming.
Have you ever met anybody in your life that had that impact?
No.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Other than, of course, the first time I met Boris.
Right. Boris the Pope. You can tell us that story. Do we want
Boris,
to know
the
that story?
circumcised pope.
How did you guys meet?
How do we meet?
Well, she can't open it up like that without me asking.
Yes, Ardith, I was with Bernstein, and I had a couple of options of where to go. One of the options was to come here to Hamilton, and the other one was to go and be assistant to Zell in Cleveland. And though that was sort of a very prestigious option, I elected to come to Hamilton because, well, Bernstein advised me of that, and he said, look, you're full of ideas, and you'll do more in your own country to use some of those ideas to develop, whereas, you don't want another job as an assistant, because he knew I was very unhappy being an assistant. Anyway, so I got the job here.
Well, considering you started your own Philharmonic at 15, I can see that being hard to be number two, right?
Well, it was particularly hard because I had enjoyed quite an active career as music director of the Northern Sinfonia in Britain in those 5 years between the ages of 20 and 24, well, 19 and 24, when I won the competition. And so I'd had quite a lot of experience professionally doing 90 concerts a year, and all of a sudden to be thrown back to be an assistant was not something I really...
It's hard to go back in
It was very hard to do. This was actually my parental influence. My mother thought that I was living far too well in England, driving around in my Bentley.
Well, I was gonna ask about that. From the bike with the cello on her back to you having a Bentley, right?
Yes. Well, that was my first car. It was
Did they keep
downhill
you
from there.
They kept you grounded? Your parents?
My parents very much kept me grounded. Anyway, Ardith's mother was the executive director of the Hamilton Philharmonic. And Ardith, aged 14, was on Valentine's Day, came to Toronto with her mother when her mother met me to discuss our first discussion of programming. And so that's when we met the very first time. But there was certainly, there were no sparks at all at that point.
Well, she was 14, right?
So,
16?
were you
What was your-
16? I guess it was the 14th. It was Valentine's Day. No, 16. That's right. No, you were 16. I remember. You were. The years don't add up otherwise. The years don't add up otherwise.
So, Ardith, what was your first impression of him? I mean, you made the papal joke, but what was your first impression of Boris?
He was extraordinary.
Yeah?
He was charismatic and extraordinary, and I'd never met anyone like him. And I had three brothers. Guys didn't really bowl me over, but he sure did.
Yeah? Well, you guys been married how long now?
36 years in August.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Well, it's not that amazing. I mean, if you find somebody you really love and you're willing to work at it, it's not something that we're constantly
compared
changing
to how
as people.
often people succeed at that, especially you both have careers, you both travel a lot. I mean, it's...
And Ardith was
not the
always
easiest thing.
growing and developing and doing new things. You know, she went to law school.
As did you, right? You're
Yeah,
both-
well, I went because she went.
Oh, did you really?
Well, yeah.
He loved you that much, he followed you to law school.
When I lost my job here at the Hamilton Philharmonic, which was a very traumatic experience for me, Ardith said, well, that's it. We had 3 young children.
Yeah.
Our youngest was 5. And she said, this is a very difficult profession. And, who knows? We have an obligation to these kids. And I've always really wanted to study law. I'm going to sit my LSATs. She sat her LSATs, got accepted at Windsor. And off she went and took a room in a rooming house. And we took her to the train every Monday morning, and her father would pick her up from the train or vice versa. And I was sort of dad at home for a little while.
Yeah.
And but at the end, she was doing a project on the Broadcasting Act on Canadian content for legal theory. And I'd had some experience with that at the BBC, and so I helped her with a little bit of the research, and I found it fascinating. Then I went to visit her at Windsor, and went to the law library with her and saw all these gorgeous hunks. And I thought, wait a minute, I got to go protect my investment.
So romantic.
So
That's lawyer love, right? Love it.
So
you, hold on a second, Ardith, you had 3 kids under 5 and you decided to become a lawyer.
No, our youngest was 5.
Oh, your youngest was, but still, 3 kids under 10.
3 kids, and well, I think he was something like that, 5. And yes.
Well, he was in school, first year of school.
Wow. I'm exhausted just thinking.
Wow.
You still practice law today?
Yes.
And how did you do as a lawyer?
I didn't. I
I
never did.
You went to school.
I never
because
did. I
of-
went to school with Ardith, and then.
Well, what happened?
in
You
the-
mentioned that Ardith's mother was the executive director of the
Yes, and she
Philharmonic.
stayed here for a number of years,
Yeah.
and then was called to become the executive director of the Association of Canadian Orchestras.
So was she still at the Philharmonic when you lost your job there?
No. She'd left a long time before
So
that.
what happened? You mentioned it was traumatic. I don't know the story.
Oh gosh, you really don't want to get into that. We have no time for that.
Like, you can give me the abridged version or the...
No, I'm not going to give you. That's for another for more alcohol.
Wow, that is
another Lair cast. Suffice it to say, it was a quarter century ago.
Well, yeah.
So it's a long time ago.
You should have heard all the heads just wishing back and forth back here when you asked that.
Really is well.
Well, the story is
Look,
this a thing of legend locally?
It's a traumatic story, but nonetheless, the great thing about it is that whatever happens to you in your life, it is truly amazing. My experience is a door closes and a window opens.
So what do you think about the fact that your Wikipedia bio written, it's a kind of a, Wikipedia is really written by a whole bunch of people, right? It's kind of
Yes,
like an
people
amalgam.
contribute, yeah.
It says that you, during your time at the HPO, managed to move Hamilton nationally from a steel town, and you were sort of the catalyst for a renaissance of Hamilton culture. I mean, they credit you with that in Wikipedia for
Well,
your time
people
at the
will say the
HPO.
darndest things.
I'm just saying it. I'm saying it. It sounds as though the impact you were making was significant at the time with the orchestra. It said, according to that, you sort of lifted the city.
We did a lot of wonderful things at that
Yeah.
time, and I don't say that's mine alone. Betty, Ardith's mom, worked really closely with me in creating this. We created a resident musician program. We did hundreds of school concerts. We created the Canadian Brass.
Right. You played in the Stucco or the DeFasco Blast
We played
Furnace?
in the Fasco Blast Furnace, and they're going to be 100 this year.
Wow.
There was some talk. They've decided it's too expensive to redo that concert in the steel mill, which is quite fascinating. It was a wonderful time. It was a time of renaissance of the whole city.
Yeah.
It wasn't just me. I mean, there
sounds
was
like a heady
lots
time.
of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Hamilton Place was contemplated and then built. The downtown center core was raised for that redevelopment of Jackson Square.
Is that a good idea looking back at it now?
No. I think one of the things that is so marvelous about Hamilton is its architecture.
Yeah.
And we still have so much of that. And Graham, whom you're going to meet in a moment, is so very much involved with keeping the heritage
yeah.
alive of the city. And
The history
I think,
and heritage, I can
yeah,
relate to.
and it's in many ways it's a shame because in many ways they probably could have better use the funds to
What was the thinking at the
redevelop the
time?
Palace Theatre.
Was that just how to modernize the city back then? Was to raise it and pave it and?
I think so, but there were a great many movements against paving it.
Oh, really? Even then?
Oh, absolutely. That whole square in front of the city was supposed to be a park in front of the theater.
Right. Yeah.
And Sheila Zack, who was very much a motivator at that time, a member of the board of the Philharmonic and other things in town, was did a campaign called Save Our Square. But in those days, everybody was building things new, and there wasn't the appreciation really for the history that we have that I think exists now. More so.
But that was the time, what, was Vic Copps the mayor at that time?
Vic Copps was the mayor, and
So-
we did some incredible things.
So you hear about that time as sort of the golden age of Hamilton, right? Vic Copps was well loved. You were with the Philharmonic and et cetera, lifting the image of Steeltown. It was recognized as a Renaissance time. What's your favorite memory of the time?
Oh gosh, I have so many wonderful memories. I think one of the ones I remember most when in the building of Hamilton Place, going with Vic Copps to see the head of Local 1005 of the Steelworkers Union, because the federal government had in '67 they had provided a number of communities across the country with the money to build auditorium, and we had been bypassed. And when we went to ask for the money, they said, "Sorry, too bad, too late, no money." And so there was some question whether it was going to be built, and we came up with this idea of a payroll deduction scheme, and went to see the president of Local 1005, whom I cannot remember, the name is escaping me. Anyway, they agreed, and that's how Hamilton Place was built.
Wow.
And so, in many ways, it's a bit of a shame to see that the people of the city are unable to use it because it's so expensive to rent now.
Well, is it part of the HEC-5 bid? Hamilton
It's
Place,
part
it is
of the
with
HEC-5
Copps,
bid,
and,
yes.
and they're looking at probably having whoever can take all three facilities and run them. So it might
It's
have
going to be a challenge. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, well,
and
it's-
also during that period of time, my wife sold all the seats in Hamilton Place again to raise money. Got donations, and we put
Really?
plaques on each of the seats to recognizing people. So she was doing tours in the summer. The Hamilton Place was actually completed before it was supposed to be, an unusual thing in those
Yeah,
days,
no kidding.
and any day. And so we had the entire summer before the season started to invite people into it to see it and make them enthusiastic about it. And the city really adopted everything cultural to a really a wonderful extent. We had a 42-week season of the Hamilton Philharmonic. We had all our major concerts were doubled, and we had full houses. Our Pops concerts were tripled. And we had 6,000 subscribers to the Pops concerts, 4,000 to the main series. I mean, there was so much going on.
And I think during the time, the Spectator did a contest, Hamilton's greatest, the greatest Hamiltonian, and you were in the top 5. Do you remember that?
Yes, indeed. I remember the cartoon that went with it.
But
I have to bring us.
the cartoon.
I have to bring us back to today because I talked about doors closing and windows opening. We are celebrating this summer the 25th anniversary of a festival that we started at that point,
Of the Boris Brott Music Festival.
and the National Academy Orchestra, which has graduated professional musicians to orchestras all over the world, over 1,500 young people. That may not sound like a lot, but you think that there are about 90 players in each orchestra. That's about
Well, I was gonna say,
about
Wiki-
16
Not to
orchestras.
keep going back to Wikipedia, but it says you've helped 1 million children in your career to become involved with
That
music.
actually was, when people start these numbers, apart from the number that represents my age, which I don't believe, people say, you're 68. It's not possible. I'm not 68. It's crazy.
All that is how good you look to her, really, right?
Exactly.
And I just have to let you know, he wasn't going to have any alcohol, and he wasn't going to eat because he's on a strict diet. He's taking good care of himself.
Well, trying to
Try it
anyway.
for a few minutes, and then the sushi came out.
But it's really been a wonderful. I've had wonderful opportunities since, and
What was it like knowing the cops?
he was an extraordinary person, real diamond in the rough. He was a man of the people, and yet he had very high cultural ideals and ideas for the city. He really saw the city as a special place, and we all did. Those of us who were involved in it, and
How much of an influence do you think that his appreciation for those higher cultural ideals allowed you to have such a Renaissance culture happening in the city? How important is it for the mayor, council, etc., to buy into that vision?
Well, I think it's vital for them to buy into that vision. Without that, really, truly, you will have nothing.
Do you think we have that vision now? What do you think the vision is these
That
days?
those are odd words. No, they're probably even words, and I have to be very careful what I say here.
No, you don't. No one's listening.
Well, I think truly they are very challenged, the council, and they have been challenged over the years. I have different views of the city than some of them do.
Well, when we first met each other, we got into a big discussion about the city. You were going to go have dinner at the club, and we got into an hour-long debate about the city now and then, which is why I invited you here.
Absolutely, that's
because
true.
It's
well, I'm a
fascinating.
passionate Hamiltonian.
Yeah,
I
for
live
sure.
here. I've made my home here, even though my career, 3/4 of the year, is in the United States and in Europe.
Yeah.
I've had a resurgent career in the last couple of years in opera, which I always wanted to do. Helped found the Hamilton Opera Company at the time and conducted some opera here. But all of a sudden, I'm doing 5 and 6 productions of opera in major theaters in Europe, which is like a whole new life at the age of 68. So that's pretty special.
Well, at 85, you could sign a 25-year contract somewhere, so
I
don't,
hope
don't
so.
underestimate
I look
yourselves.
forward to that. I look forward
But
to
you've
that.
decided with all of your global travel, I mean, we talked about it, 14, you were living in Mexico for a year. Before you were 20, you were working in Europe. To stay in Hamilton, I presume part of it is for love and family legacy with your wife, but to stay here, to have been so involved back in those days and still, of course, with your festival, do you see the city now as having the momentum that people think it's got?
Let me put it this way. I think the potential is enormous for this city, a potential which is realized in certain eras and not so realized in others. I think we are more challenged now than we have been in the past. Perhaps that has to do with economics. We've lost the major heavy industry support that that was the basis of the city's resurgence and development and glory days, if you want to call it then. But then again, it was also the flip side of that, is that we were called a lunch bucket town. So I think the city has immense potential. I think being as close as we are to Toronto, being as close as we are to the United States, having an absolutely gorgeous harbor front, our frontage on Lake Ontario, the trail that goes across Ontario that goes right straight through our city is absolutely beautiful. The architecture of the city is both downtown and also in the southwest neighborhood is special.
Gorgeous, yeah.
It is gorgeous. And I think we have a lot of potential, and it's a question of realizing that potential.
Do we have the political will?
Certainly there are those of us in the community that have that will. And if you look at politics in a greater sense, we are part of that politic. And so I think people like Graham and Ardith and I and others who have that will, I think have perhaps to be a little more proactive in seeing it happen. And I'm criticizing myself because I'm perhaps not active enough.
Well, that's part of the reason why I'm asking you the question, because I've long done commentary on council, and it's not an easy job, but it's easy to find faults with the way council's run over the last 15 years. People criticize it for having a lot of short-term reactions as opposed to long-term visions. And when you juxtapose it with the Vic Cops who had those higher cultural ideals, and I always hear about his era as mayor, I'm looking for, what is it that's going to get that kind of vision and that kind of higher ideals at our council?
Bob, we had many discussions on the subject of the city and the growth of the city, and I remember being interviewed on numerous occasions on CHML with him in the morning, usually very early in the morning, and then we'd finished the broadcast and we've had these long discussions about what was really needed in the city, and I think truly that he certainly in those informal discussions, there were many wonderful ideas and idealism. One hopes that will find roots in the city council, and that I think the potential is there.
So why do you, as an experienced, engaged citizen, need to get more engaged? Why the self-criticism?
Because I think it doesn't behoove one to be an armchair critic. I mean, it's easy to sit in a chair and criticize. It's much more difficult if you're actually in the throes of doing it and part of it. And I'm certainly ready. I don't want to run for anything because I'm first of all, I'm not here long enough to be able to do it, and it would prejudice other things that I'm trying to do here in the city to contribute to continue that
really,
cultural
why would you
contribution.
want to? I mean, the trappings of politics are not the greatest.
We give about 35 concerts during the summer a year, And we really enliven this city with classical music, with opera, with jazz, with pop music. And we have, we sell out our houses. We are not in Hamilton Place because we can't afford to be, but we are in Mohawk College, and we sell that out regularly. So we're providing something, and I feel that's my contribution.
It's kind of sad that you were part of building of Hamilton Place back in the day, and the Brott Music Festival is the biggest music festival of its kind in the country. It started in Hamilton. Hamilton gets the credit for your entrepreneurial efforts, and yet you can't afford to play in Hamilton Place.
Yes, it is sad.
What can be done about something as ridiculous as that?
It's complex. And there's sometimes when really one shouldn't comment. And I think this is one of those, this is one of those times. You see, one of the things I did learn in law school, one of the things I did learn in law school is the benefit in certain instances of silence.
Right. Well, I'm thinking, though, that the whole way that all of that is going to be managed is possibly going to change. And with the
one hopes that it will change, and maybe that is the only way that it can change.
That's what I'm wondering, yeah.
Because I think certain traditions get hidebound into the community, get solidified into a community, and ways of dealing with problems that the city council really cannot effectively deal with. That a private enterprise taking it out and looking at it, excuse me, just from a business standpoint, and recognizing what has to change within it, and hopefully that these commercial organizations will leave space for the local organizations to contribute, to be part of it, and to be able to afford to be there. It can't just be a roadhouse. It wasn't built as a roadhouse. It was built. My first connection, interestingly, with Hamilton had to do with the building of that theater.
Right.
I was Lenny's assistant, and Yonda Gaetani, a wonderful soprano, was soloist with the Philharmonic one evening, and we went to a party, and her husband, Tom de Gaetani, was the head of Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, and they were a consultancy firm. And he came up to me during the evening and said, "You're Canadian, do you know where Hamilton is?" I said, "Yeah, it's that place with the smokestacks, between Toronto and Buffalo." And he said, "Have you ever been there?" And I said, "No, why would one want to?" Well, I mean, I didn't know about Hamilton. You see, that was a wonderful smokescreen behind which all this wonderful stuff was happening, but I didn't know that at the time. Anyway, he said, "I would like you to consult with me because we've been hired to consult on the building of a new auditorium. Wow. We're doing a feasibility study." And one of the aspects of that feasibility study was to meet all the groups in Hamilton who might potentially use the theater. Yeah. And to really, in the building of the theater, make accommodation for them. And Trevor Garwood-Jones, who was the architect behind the building, and really was a wonderful person to work with. And Hamilton Place is one of the best multi-purpose theaters in the world, because of the fact that we have two stages on that theater, one behind the other. One that has this wonderful cedar shell that allows us to have the kind of reverberation that we need for classical music. A stage housing behind that cedar shell for amplified events. The ability to change the acoustics with those large tapestries that descend from the ceiling from a zero reverberation to 4.5 seconds. So it really is one of the first theaters.
For this theater is making me frustrated listening that you can't be using it.
Well, of course it's frustrating, but there's always hope, and the fact that Mohawk exists, and is what other community college has a 1,200 seat theater that you can put a symphony orchestra on the stage of and do opera. I mean, it doesn't exist. And McMaster certainly has nothing like it.
So how does Boris Brott get more engaged in bringing those higher ideals to Hamilton at your tender age of 68?
Well, because I think I'd be quite happy to be asked for advice. Yeah. I would be quite happy to talk about it. Certainly everywhere that I go, I take Hamilton with me proudly and talk about the city and how wonderful it is. And of course, in Europe, we have none of those stigmas. So when I say Hamilton and I explain, the community and how, for example, how many Italians came here and settled here, and how they contributed, they are very proud of their contribution as Italians to the city, and they don't think of us in the negative sense that Torontonians do, for example.
No reason for them to. I mean, you and I are both from Montreal, but we see the beauty of Hamilton. I think that sometimes people in Hamilton buy into the narrative too much.
That's true, but you know, the flip side of that is that the real estate here is really quite affordable. We're sitting on close to James Street North. Look at the explosion that has happened in the artistic community here.
I couldn't afford this place in Toronto with this proximity
I'm
to
sure
the main
not.
intersection.
And we probably couldn't afford to run the National Academy and our festival in Toronto, whereas we can here. So there are aspects of it that are negative and aspects that are positive. I think we have to get rid of the stigma of trying to be a big city and divorcing ourselves from the mother city over in Toronto. We need to have a much better transportation system back and forth and exchange between these two cities. I mean, it is ridiculous that people cannot come from Toronto to attend a concert and use public transportation to get back. The only way they can come here is if they drive a car, or not even buses.
And we can't go and have fun in Toronto on a Friday night because we worry about being able to get back. Yeah. Sure.
The migration the other way.
But either way, that it doesn't benefit anybody with the situation that we've
Look,
got.
I'm ready to be part of it. I'm not ready to run for office.
You brought that up twice now. Normally in the Lair, Graham, I usually pepper that question in. He's brought it up twice now. Thou doth protest too much, my friend.
No.
Watch out.
I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it and maintain my life.
Sure. And why would you want to? If you're being asked, when I last saw you might have been flying to Trieste to do a concert. If you've got that kind of opportunity coming up every couple of weeks, why would you want to settle yourself with municipal politics, right?
Well, no, I don't think of it in those terms, but rather that I enjoy the travel, I enjoy the exchange, I enjoy speaking the languages, I enjoy artistically what I can do in those places, but I also love coming back here. And I couldn't spend 52 weeks a year here and devote the necessary time to it.
One last thing we talked about when we had our discussion was I said that there were a lot of young entrepreneurs. I'm almost 40, met a lot of people in the last few years who are 25 and up who don't dream of moving to Toronto to make it big, who intend to build their businesses in Hamilton, who feel as though the naysayers from a generation ago who remember those years you talked about are passé now, that they're kind of, adding a weight that's unnecessary, that the city is really moving forward in spite of all of that proud history. It's got a new direction, a new energy. And we got into a conversation about that. But listening to you and listening to the experiences you've had and the role you played in Hamilton, I think voices like yours need to be part of that conversation, right?
Well, certainly I'm ready and willing to be part of it. One of the kind of serendipitous things that happened to me along the way was that I developed a career as a motivational speaker, and I've spoken literally to hundreds of Fortune 500 companies around the world on the subject of creativity, teamwork, and leadership. And I would certainly be happy to be part of the team.
And marketing too. You've got marketing chops.
Well,
I read.
That's more artist than me. Maybe.
No, I read your last blog post that you did a year ago, and you're the only person I know who describes their own work as superlative. I think you put right in there.
Me?
Yeah, he did.
Oh,
You said it was a superlatively professional staging of something that you guys
but
did.
that's reflecting on somebody else's work, not my own.
My point is, it's your festival, and as I read that, I thought, and I've always heard that you were extremely good at marketing yourself. That concert in the blast furnace sort of got you international acclaim, right?
No, well, I want to correct that impression. I'm not interested necessarily in marketing me, but I am interested in marketing the activity that we do that involves others.
And you've got the marketing chops, and the city needs marketing help
and we have
in
a
as much
wonderful
as the
team.
other.
I mean, our team at the festival, which is headed by my wife, who has many wonderful ideas, and really has been an inspiration to me for all the children's concerts, for example, that we've done. We wrote a script on bullying, using Beethoven as an example, which was really Ardith's idea, and Ardith wrote most of the script.
I have heard a little bit about this, yeah.
And we've done children's concerts that involve the station, the Leona station, and all the immigrants who passed through it and came to Hamilton.
Are your children into music at all?
Our children, love music. Our son is really a very able musician, but in the pop field. Is a great keyboardist.
Oh, wow.
Plays guitar, bass guitar, and lead guitar. Composes music.
Rock star bassist coming up in the Lair in a
In
little
the
while.
pop field.
What's that?
But in the pop field,
you heard that, did you?
Yeah.
But meaning is a negative. It's simple. No. I say it was just to distinguish it from my field, but he's very good at it. The fact is that it's difficult to make a go of it, to make a living in that field. More difficult, I think, in many ways. Their roots in classical music.
Especially
in
the
pop
music's
music,
free, right? Nobody's paying for it anymore. So.
well, the recording industry. Our daughter, for example, worked for Sony BMG and oh gosh, what's it? The House of Blues for a decade. So they're into music, but more in the popular vein than in the serious vein. But they are earning a living at different things. Alexandra is a whiz at real estate, and she's doing phenomenally well in Toronto. David is working for Open Text and is in charge of their film division. He always wanted to be a filmmaker and does both films internally for the company and also their advertising. David, Ben, our youngest son, is out in Vancouver and is building green buildings.
Wow.
So I mean, they're doing wonderful things creatively, all on their own, but in different fields. And when I said I thought perhaps it would have been great. It would have been easier for them starting out if they'd had a musical, if they'd been encouraged to study music. Sure. But then that would also have been limiting to them in terms of their own vision. So we're really happy with what they're doing.
Struck the balance. They wanted you to do music because they could help you with that, but they encouraged you when you stepped away from it for that defining year when you were 11. And then with your own children, you decided to sort of let them go and do their thing, and they've all stayed in the creative area.
Well, I think they are naturally creative. Their mother is creative. Ardith just wrote her latest children's book, which we've sold out the first edition of in some 20 days.
What's that called, Ardith? What's the title?
It's called Here I Am.
And what's the story?
It's a story told in the first person, and it's a baby before it's born.
Wow.
While it's being born, and for a few days after it's born. It's sort of the last trimester, birth, and the first few days.
What inspired you to write that?
Oh, a number of things. One of which was an experience Boris had when he was quite young, and he can tell you far more than I can about that experience. Go.
Do you really want me to? Okay. I was being interviewed like this, and the same questions tend to come up in interviews. Like, when did you first realize you had an interest in music?
Right. Which I don't think I asked, actually.
You didn't.
I did
So
not.
that distinguishes this interview. But this interviewer asked that question, and I said, well, it was in the womb, which of course made them very interested. But it turned out that when I was studying playing string quartets as a child, I was playing the violin, but in certain pieces and certain pieces only, I knew the cello part from memory, and this seemed odd to me. So I asked my mother, how is that? That seems really weird. And she ventured that perhaps it was that she had played these works when I was in utero during the last trimester of pregnancy. And sure enough, she had records of those programs, and I actually did experience those works in the womb. Well, listening to this broadcast was a Dr. Charles Varney, who was writing a book called The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And so he called me up, found his way through the CBC to me, and interviewed me for this book. And so I formed part of a chapter in this book. I guess the idea, though, of life in the womb, of the child's vision of life in the womb, and the interest that all children have really in being born.
I was going to say, I've got a 21-month-old and a 3-year-old, and they are fascinated with babies and pregnant mums, and I bet your book is great for my 3-year-old, right? For them to get it. Is that sort of the art? Yeah. That's so exciting. I could talk babies all night long.
And artists have done really very beautifully in writing this book in a very immediately communicative manner. So it's yeah.
Well, I'm glad you could come into the Lair for a chat. If you want to come back someday, have a little bit more to drink and tell me about the two things we weren't allowed to talk about. Or maybe I will just ply Graham with alcohol and get it out of him in the next Lair, one way or another. But I love the history you have with the city, and I hope that you'll be more engaged. The Laircast is hopefully a start.
And able, so long as it fits into the schedule.
Well, you said this is the first podcast you've ever done, and won't be the last. We'll have you back, not just to talk about those things, but let it be the start of some more engagement for you locally, Boris, because people need to hear more about you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ardith, for being here. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Deirdre. That's great. Fun. Next up is Graham. Graham's good to go next.
Yes.
So you survived your first podcast.
Chats in the Lair is a Power Group production. Visit us at powergroup.ca or laircast.com, or check us out on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.